them all what I'm made up. Strut down the hall, won't stop till I get enough.
Okay, so welcome to the deep dive, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at something that I think affects just about all of us, and that's the trade war that seems to be really heating up right now.
Yeah, it's getting pretty serious.
Yeah, you shared a really fascinating article with me from Reuters that came out just today, April 9th, 2025. And it looks like things are really starting to heat up with some tariffs that are going back and forth.
Yeah, it's getting nasty.
Yeah, and we want to make sure that we can help you guys sort of cut through all the noise and really understand what's going on here and what the potential impacts are going to be for the global economy and also for, your wallet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's start with what happened today.
Okay.
The article details that President Trump's new tariffs on Chinese imports have officially gone into effect.
Right.
And these are some pretty steep duties. We're talking about a rate of 104%.
Yeah, that's pretty huge. And what's really important, I think, to think about here is who these tariffs are affecting. They're not just targeted at, China or any one specific country. It's rivals and allies alike.
Yeah, it's a very broad stroke. It's very different from a lot of trade disputes that we've seen in the past, and it really does suggest a much wider potential impact.
Yeah.
So this is really the latest development in what the article describes as a thicket of tariffs that are really starting to unwind, decades of global trade policy and the way that things have been done for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a huge shift in direction, and the numbers really tell the story here.
Yeah.
I mean, average U.S. tariffs right now are above 20%.
Wow.
Which is massively up from just 2.5% before Trump took office. So,
Yeah, that's it.
We're talking about a huge change here.
Yeah, so the U.S. has put these tariffs in place, particularly on goods coming from China.
Mm-hmm.
What was Beijing's response to this?
Well, I guess not surprisingly, they responded pretty swiftly and pretty decisively, too. The report details that China announced its own tariff hikes on U.S. imports pretty much right after the U.S. tariffs took effect. So we're now seeing an 84% tariff on U.S. goods going into China, up from 34% previously.
Wow, so a real tit for tat.
Exactly. Yeah, classic kind of trade war escalation.
And it doesn't sound like they're just matching tariffs either. I mean, it sounds like they're really preparing for, this to go on for a while.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They're digging in for the long haul. The article actually quotes China warning that it has the determination and the means to continue this fight.
Oh, wow.
So they're not backing down anytime soon. And it goes beyond just the tariffs, too.
Oh, really?
They've also implemented restrictions on 18 U.S. companies, mostly in defense, but that comes on top of the roughly 60 U.S. firms that are already being penalized by China.
Wow. So it sounds like, they're coming at this from a lot of different angles here.
Yeah, it's a multi-pronged approach for sure.
And what about the impact on China's own economy? The report mentioned some interesting moves regarding their currency, right?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, with these heightened trade tensions, China's currency, the yuan, has come under some pressure.
Yeah.
And the report indicates that the central bank there has actually asked major state-owned banks to reduce their purchases of U.S. dollars.
Oh, wow. So they're really trying to manage this and control it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, this is a way for them to potentially offset some of the negative impact of the U.S. tariffs on their own businesses.
Okay, yeah, because if their currency is weaker, then their exports are cheaper.
Exactly.
Okay, and then there was this other little detail in here that I thought was really interesting. The one about the Christmas trees.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What's going on with that?
Well, it's fascinating how these big, trade policies, these high-level decisions can have such tangible effects on the ground. And, in this case, we see that Chinese makers of plastic Christmas trees and ornaments, who, they basically dominate the U.S. market, they haven't gotten any orders yet from U.S. importers.
Wow.
So it's like, they're just completely in limbo right now.
It really highlights the disruption that can happen to these supply chains and how unpredictable things can become for businesses.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not just China that's reacting here. The report also says that the EU and Canada are taking action as well.
That's right. Yeah, this is a global situation. And the European Union has approved its own set of countermeasures. with 25% tariffs on a range of U.S. imports as kind of a first round of response.
Okay.
And, the EU itself is facing these U.S. tariffs of 20% on most of its products. And there's even higher duties on certain things like cars and steel.
So they're really getting hit hard, too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, they see this as a defensive move,
Yeah.
a way to protect their own industries.
And what about Canada?
Yeah, Canada's also not taking this lying down. Their countermeasures also took effect on Wednesday.
Wow, so this is really widespread.
Yeah, it's pretty much everyone pushing back against the U.S. right now.
Yeah, and it sounds like all of this is really shaking things up in the global economy.
It is. The report uses the term market turmoil, but I think that's putting it lightly.
Yeah.
Global markets are really taking a beating right now, and it's not just stock markets. Trillions in equity have evaporated over the past week.
Wow.
Oil prices are plummeting. We're seeing 4-year lows. And even investors are selling off traditional safe haven assets like U.S. Treasury bonds and the dollar.
Oh, wow. So that's a sign that people are really worried.
Yeah, typically you see people flock to those assets when things are uncertain. So this is definitely a sign of deep concern about the U.S. economic outlook.
And it's not just those big financial markets. It sounds like this is actually impacting how businesses are able to operate.
Yeah, absolutely. The turmoil has spilled over into corporate funding markets, which means it's getting more expensive for companies, even lower risk companies, to borrow money.
Oh, wow.
So this is, really impacting their ability to invest, to grow their business, to hire more people.
And then there's that warning from Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase. He's not exactly sugarcoating things.
No, he's not. He's quoted as saying that Trump's tariffs will probably lead to a recession and defaults by borrowers.
Wow. So those are some serious consequences.
Yeah, and this is coming from the head of one of the biggest financial institutions in the world, so his words carry a lot of weight.
Yeah, it's not just some random person on the internet. This
Exactly.
is someone who really has their finger on the pulse.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, in this climate of instability, we're seeing other countries stepping up.
Right.
The report talks about Japan and Canada agreeing to cooperate to stabilize the global financial system.
Wow. So traditionally, that's been a role that the U.S. has played.
Exactly. And so for them to be kind of taking the lead on this is really a potential sign of a shift in the global economic order.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe there's a little bit of a lack of confidence in the U.S. leadership on this right now.
It's possible. Yeah, it definitely raises some questions about the direction things are heading.
And then, you look at Trump's own messaging on these tariffs.
Yeah.
He calls them permanent. But then he also suggests that they're just a negotiating tactic, so it's a little bit confusing.
It is very contradictory, and it makes it hard to really understand what the strategy is here. Yeah. He actually posted on social media, be cool, everything is going to work out well, the USA will be bigger and better than ever before, which, it sounds optimistic, but it doesn't really line up with all the negative reaction that we're seeing and, the escalating trade war.
Yeah, it's a really mixed message, and it's hard to tell what he's actually trying to achieve.
Yeah, and how long these measures are going to last.
Yeah.
Is this a short-term thing, or is this really a permanent change?
And he says that the rationale behind this is to rebuild the U.S. industrial base. And he says that he's open to country-by-country negotiations, and he even mentions linking trade to foreign and military aid.
Right, which is really interesting because it suggests he's willing to use trade as this tool.
Yeah.
In a much broader way.
Yeah.
It's not just about economics anymore. It's about foreign policy. It's about military strategy. It's all tied together.
Yeah, and he has been meeting with leaders from Japan and South Korea, and he has this meeting coming up with Vietnam. So it seems like he really is pursuing these bilateral agreements.
Yeah, he definitely is. And then, you have that quote about those countries kissing my ass, which kind of gives you a sense of his negotiating style.
It does paint a vivid picture.
It does. Yeah, it's very assertive, you could say.
Yeah.
And, whether it's effective or not remains to be seen.
But even with these talks going on, it doesn't sound like the administration is ready to lift the tariffs anytime soon. And in fact, there's talk of even more tariffs coming.
That's right. Yeah, U.S. officials are saying these tariffs are probably going to stay in place for a while.
Oh, wow.
And they're even hinting at a major tariff on pharmaceutical imports, which, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, as soon as that news came out, global drug maker stocks plunged.
Ah.
So it just shows you how sensitive the market is to all this and how much uncertainty there is.
And it sounds like for China specifically, the U.S. is not even really prioritizing talks with them right now.
No, the article specifically says that U.S. officials are not prioritizing talks with China.
So it sounds like that situation is probably going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah, it seems that way, unfortunately.
So shifting gears a little bit, what about the impact here at home in the U.S.? The stock market had kind of a mixed reaction to all of this on Wednesday.
Yeah, there was a slight increase in some of the U.S. stock indexes on Wednesday, but analysts are saying that's probably due to investors buying cheaper tech stocks after the recent drop.
Okay.
But the bigger picture is that since these tariffs were announced on April 2nd, the S&P 500 has had its deepest loss since the 1950s.
Wow.
So, there might be some short-term rebounds here and there, but overall, there's a lot of concern and volatility in the U.S. market.
And what about the impact on everyday Americans?
Boy.
What about our listeners?
Well, economists are projecting that these tariffs could actually increase costs for the average U.S. household by several $1,000s annually.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of money, and, that could create some real problems, especially given all the talk about, lowering the cost of living and helping people out.
Yeah.
And the article cites a Reuters Ipsos poll that shows that 3 out of 4 Americans actually expect prices to increase because of these tariffs.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So people are already feeling the pinch.
Yeah. And we are seeing some companies start to react to this.
Yeah, some companies have said they're going to raise prices right away to cover the higher import costs.
Right.
While others, might be able to hold off for a bit depending on their inventory and their supply chains, but the pressure is definitely building.
And then you have Walmart, which is kind of an interesting case here.
It is, because they're the biggest U.S. importer of containerized goods.
Right.
And they're actually sticking to their full-year sales forecast and saying that they're going to keep prices low.
Wow. So they're really trying to hold the line.
They are. It's a bold move, and it'll be interesting to see how long they can keep that up.
Yeah, especially if these tariffs stay in place. And what about the political response here in the U.S.? It sounds like the Democrats are a little bit divided on how to respond to all of this.
Yeah, the article mentions that there is a bit of a split among Democrats. They generally agree that the tariffs are probably counterproductive and could hurt the economy, but they don't seem to have a clear alternative plan.
Okay.
Some are saying that Trump is just going too far with these broad measures, but, others haven't really come up with a different solution.
Yeah.
There was a quote in the article from Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer who said, "Tariffs need to be used like a scalpel, not a hammer," which I think kind of sums up the feeling that a lot of people have.
Yeah.
That these tariffs are just too blunt of an instrument. They're not precise enough. They're causing too much collateral damage.
So as we wrap up here, what are the key takeaways for our listeners from this deep dive into the Reuters report?
Well, I think first and foremost, we're seeing a really rapid escalation of global trade tensions, and it's being driven by these substantial tariffs that the U.S. has imposed, and this is leading to retaliatory measures from major trading partners like China, the EU, and Canada. And secondly, there are some very serious concerns being raised by top economic figures about the potential for a global recession and financial instability. So, this is not just a theoretical thing. This is something that could have a real impact on people's lives.
Yeah, this isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet.
Exactly. This is about people's jobs, their savings, their ability to make ends meet. And, all of this is happening against the backdrop of a decades-old global trading order that's basically unraveling. And we're seeing these unusual alliances forming, like Japan and Canada, trying to stabilize the financial system.
Yeah, it's a real shakeup of the world order.
It is. And, it's happening so quickly that it's hard to predict what the long-term consequences are going to be. But it's definitely something that everyone should be paying attention to.
And it's not just about the big picture either. This has the potential to hit home in a very real way.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about the potential for higher prices on everything from groceries to electronics and broader economic uncertainty that could affect job security and investments. So this is something that could touch every aspect of your life.
Yeah, and it's really unfolding at an incredible pace. It makes you wonder what the long-term consequences are going to be for global supply chains and, how business is done around the world.
Yeah. Is this a temporary blip, or are we looking at a fundamental shift in how the global economy works?
Yeah. Is this the new normal?
It's a big question, and it's one that we'll have to grapple with in the months and years to come.
It is indeed. Well, thank you for diving deep with us today.
Pleasure.
See you next time.
See you later.
Bye.
Sound the alarm. I'm coming up. We'll have a ball. I'm sweet like a buttercup. You're Bobby doll. Show them all what I'm made of. Strut down the hall. Won't stop till I get enough.